why I don't have a lot of content in my PowerPoint today is because I'm asking questions because I noticed that people are having trouble. So that's why we're going to do some stuff here. I'd like to do more, but I want to make sure you guys are solid with what we have. I don't have a lot of content, so let's do that first. Let's do your Q&A, and then we'll go into the next part, which is what I want to do. And by the way, there's a reason why I'm asking. I know that people are struggling with just kind of like what Sarah said, but she said, we learned a little bit of how to walk, kind of. And then now you're asking us to sprint. I'm actually asking you to fly, is what I'm asking you to do, not sprint. And I know that this is a big transition for you all. It's not unprecedented or unexpected by any means. And I want you to think about why. It's not because I want to make it so that it's crazy. Actually, I'm trying to prep you for even harder stuff coming up next semester. Right, so that's reasons. But again, I remember a professor always thinks that the things that he or she is doing or they are doing is very important, and students have to sometimes struggle to understand why. So that's why I wanted to ask those questions, and I'm thankful that you guys are honest and telling me the stuff that you're having trouble with, so I can help.
I'm sorry. I have a question about entry point. So we have only one entry point, right? Index file.
Yes. Let's go over it one more time. If you give me a chance, I'll go over the.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. All right. So welcome back. We are COMP2112 in the fall 2022 semester at Georgian, and it is week 11. Hi for me, and I'll just go off the screen again. And lots of stuff we've done last week. What we did last week was we talked about the Fetch API. We talked about Axios. Andres and I were kind of, he likes Fetch. I was the one that says, well, Axios for me is a little easier. And we had a conversation about that a little bit in class. But for the most part, what we did last week was we created an Axios instance, and then we kind of created the TV show data service and a bunch of other stuff. And this week, my plan was to work more with Axios in something called Firebase, all right, which is going to give us a real-time database as opposed to, doing things with a data JSON.data kind of thing. I was going to set you up with this. However, I am also sensitive to the fact that people are trying to understand everything. So what I want to do before we get into this demo and before we complete full prep with React and Axios is talk about the application structure one more time. So what I've got here is week 10, and that was last week. And what I want to do is copy it into week 11. So let's just like normal, we'll just do that. And I'm starting right into the demo today because we need all the time we have for what we want to do today again. And more practice is what we're trying to do. So here's week 11, and I'm going to bring that into Visual Studio Code as normal. So I'm just going to drag and drop that in. In here, I'm going to just make some changes to some of the things we did last week. So again, week 11, we're going to update this to 0.4. I'm going to just change the repository link to this, which we're going to create. We haven't created this yet, but we will. And for the most part, that's okay there. So save. And then I also want to change the README file .md, so it says week 11, and just that we're up to date with the next version. So again, could I have made all of these in one big repo? Yes, I could have. I didn't, because you can always step back and see the previous version and the previous version and so on. That's why I've done that. Okay, so let's do a couple other things like we normally do. I'm going to get kind of remove origin, because it's still pointing to the previous repository. And I'm just going to bring up the new repository up here. So github.com, and I'm going to go to Georgian. I'm going to make a brand new repository for today and for this week. So again, it's going to be called COMP2112 in the fall 2022 semester, and it's week 11. This will be for your in-class exercise for this week. Public and create. And then I'm just going to copy all this stuff right here, just like normal, right click and enter, and it should push everything up to GitHub. So the new link is this. So if you want to follow along for today, please go to this link. And then if I'm going too fast, you can always go there and kind of catch up. And I need to push this up to GitHub, all the changes I made. So I'm going to go and git commit -m, and I'll say added or modified project files. I'll say modified project files for week 11. Hit push. All right, so that's this. Awesome. All right, so that stuff is all done. Now, questions that I've had is, first of all, let's just install everything. So when we always download from GitHub, we always want to do a yarn install, because a yarn install will replace all the node modules folders and everything else that we need to run our application. All right, so the first thing we do before we do anything else, before we add anything else, or change anything else, is we want to reestablish our application and check to see that it's working. Okay, that's what we want to do. So first and foremost, and this doesn't matter if I'm kind of programming stuff on the web, or if I'm doing things with game dev or C++ or C# or whatever language. Whenever you kind of look at a previous kind of application, you always want to make sure that it's working before you move on to something else. So that's what we're doing here. Okay, so now that it's downloaded, I'm just going to do a yarn start, and so we can get our application started. And it's going to run our little server here locally for us. Whenever it feels like it. Can take time. All right, and let's just go over the stuff we had last day so we can, kind of talk about it a little bit. Okay, there we go. So we had this little site here, and it was pretty, basic. And you can see that we can move from one place to the other, no problem. We have a little contact page too. And we also have this TV shows list that showed us all the TV shows that we kind of had in our little file. And we read from the file last day. So we went into our public folder, and here in our data folder, we have our TV shows.json. And we probably saw that wrong. And what we did was we read all the details from here, from our data. That's what we did. And then we outputted everything by using Axios to this particular page, the TV shows list. That's what we did last week. Now, questions, first of all, that you guys had, or I'm just going to go with Elaine for a second, then I'll come back to what you asked, what you were talking about, Sarah, is the application structure. So what we have to understand is what we're doing here when we're using create React app is we're using a scaffold. Okay, so this is scaffold means that this application has been created for us. We didn't do this from scratch. Okay, that's the one thing to note. So we made this by using create React app from the very first day. Okay, and what it did was created a bunch of folders for us, and well, actually a couple of them, just the public folder and the SRC folder with some starting files and so on. One thing to note is that, like every application that uses JavaScript, the index.html is really your entry point. This is your entry point right here, okay? So your entry point for React, and I'm just reviewing the stuff we talked about already, okay, for those people who need it, is how it works. Really what happens is in the public folder, index.html is your entry. okay? And it's just like any other app that we were going to make from scratch. If I was going to make an app from scratch like we did in the first couple of weeks together, right? We just used an index HTML and then we connected some kind of JavaScript to it. The difference here is that the JavaScript application that we're making is much bigger, and it's been split up over many, many files. And so the challenge is, how does all this link together? And add a component, how come we have to, work on 2 or 3 different files at once, make things work? So our entry point into the app from a JavaScript perspective here is index.tsx. This is how we get into it. All right. So, what index.tsx does is it creates our first, I don't know if you want to call it the structure or the framework that we're going to work within. Okay, that's what it does. Now, what it does is it kind of calls upon this kind of almost like a primary or central component to the entire application called app. App itself is still a component because React is a component-based system, and especially functional components that we talked about a couple weeks ago. The app.tsx file is kind of where it, we don't have to make it this way, by the way. Index.tsx could be, kind of created in different ways. But for the most part, what it does is app.tsx, kind of injects its custom element right here, okay? And so this is what is rendered into the root element where it says root. And remember, document.get element by ID, like we said before, it's a query that finds in the browser cache somewhere an element that has the root ID. We saw that if you go back to the index.html. And in here, you can see there's a div with an ID of root, and that is where everything is injected right in here. So that is where my application lives, like we talked about before, okay? My index.tsx, this one, what it does is it injects this app element, the one that we just made, a custom app element, and the custom app element is defined here, right? So this is where we kind of import React, and like Andres said before, we don't need to do that, but this is kind of legacy way of doing it. And then we import all of our other components, and it links together into some kind of routing, we're going to say a front-end routing system. And when we talk routing and what routes are, you got to think about that we want to listen for any changes to our application as it moves from one link to another, right? So we list all the links here, and these are all the viable links, the working links in our application. If I want other ones, then I would create more of them, right? And one of the challenges that we have here with this kind of structure is that what about if we have thousands of links? How do we deal with that? And clearly, this would not be sufficient to do it like this. You'd have to break it down into smaller chunks, smaller subdomains, right? So that you'd have maybe only a small number of links in that subdomain. But for the most part, this is how it works. You have a link, right? And then the link points to an element that you want to render, and render is a nice little word for draw. It'll draw the element, create the element on the screen for you on the view. That's what it does, right? So that is what it does. So first we have a path, and then it points to an element that we've created. And these elements like home, about, project, services, and contact are all functions that we have to define in a separate file. So this is where the files all come together. It's almost like before I can do this, my links and so on, what I need to do is create all the dependencies for these before I actually connect them, because I have nothing to connect. Example, if I want to go to my home page, but I don't have a home element, then it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be blank, right? So I need to make my home element first. And if I do that by going into my views folder. So the paths here, import home from views content home, looks inside the views folder, and then goes into the content folder, and then goes into the home folder. And the home folder is just a component, and the component is a function. That's all it is that we're returning out. React does all the heavy lifting for us. Remember, it uses declarative syntax. So something here that looks like it is HTML is actually going to be injected into the page. Remember what we talked about a few weeks ago. We talked about making a single page application, right? So we have a page, and the single page application, if it is that, so single page application, what it does is it swaps out elements of our page. So it has, like, for example, the header element that we swap out, and then there's also the footer element, and then there's a content in the middle. Well, this is kind of what we're doing here. And what we're doing here is we're actually taking the content, which is, and forgive me as I'm going long here, but we're taking the content, which is this stuff right here. So all this, right? We're taking this content and we're injecting it right here. That's what we're doing, right? And this content is something that is generated by React, right? So even though it looks like HTML, it's not, it's JSX, right? And it's creating almost like this element, or more of a compound element in memory, all right? So this element that we're seeing, and there's multiple elements here, but what it's doing is it's creating almost like, I don't know, building blocks. I almost think about them like Lego pieces, right? And it's almost like I'm taking this block of data, right? And the way it's been formatted and injecting it into where I'm telling it to go, right? So here, let's say, for example, like I define the element itself. And then once I've done that, as an example, then if I go back to my app.tsx, right? Because I'm listing it, I'm importing it here, and I'm exporting it here. So here's where I'm exporting it. Here's where I'm importing it. Oops, into my app.tsx. Then what happens is I can use it because I've defined it. So I've defined the element, and then I use it down in here. Okay, so that's what I've done. And I've just used, I was just showing how to use props or properties here in the bottom part right here. But for the most part, that is how it works. So you kind of define an element first, and then you point to it with your root, right? So your root or route, potato, what it does is it basically says, hey, if I go to the home/home page, and again, if I go back out to show you that, so if I go to home, and if I just type it in here, right, then this root, oops, because it's known, right, it's going to point to the home element, and that's why it's going to display it, right? So that's what this does. It kind of connects our path to an element that we've defined. That's what it does, okay? And that's why we need to kind of split it up into these different pieces, right? Building on that, what we did last week, and again, without kind of going through everything that we did 100% from the beginning, but what we did last week was we know we need to get some data, and we defined two ways of doing that. One where we can use something like fetch, the fetch API, and the other one that we can do, which is Axios. Okay, Axios is just another library that we downloaded and installed in our package.json. Okay, that's what we did. So notice that Axios here is this, something we've downloaded and installed. And then what we've done last week was, in order for us to show data in our TV shows list, that's another component. And it's almost like I've created another section in our code here in order for us to do that. So we have our footer and our header. These are components that we get injected into the top and the bottom of our page. Our content, which mostly goes in the middle. And I've created another content area called TV shows list because I'm going to do full CRUD, create, read, update, delete. And I'd like to try and do that as much as we can today. We'll see how it goes. Again, I want to move a little slower today than normal, right? And only because I would like for you guys to understand more. And it just takes more practice and more looking at this as we go. So in order to facilitate us, kind of displaying stuff in our TV shows list, right? We did a couple things, right? We needed to display it in some kind of table, right? That's what we wanted to do. But in order for us to display it, we needed a way to fetch the data Now, again, you can use fetch, or you can use, yes, it is. I separated it, Kyle, because I wanted to, it's in views. It's a type of view, right? Our TV shows list. I just wanted to separate it out so it's easier for us to see it. It is content. It's all, but there's going to be other content that's related to this. So there's probably going to be a couple of other pages I want to make, one for add and one for edit. And that's why I kind of split it off. But realistically, you're right. We could have put TV shows list inside of views. Going back though, so we needed to display data, but before we display data, we need to talk about or discuss or figure out a way of, you know, kind of modeling that data or structuring that data, just like you did in, should that folder be inside content? Not, isn't it? Isn't it in oh yes, I see what you're saying. Well, it's in views right now, right? So it's in SRC views right now, which it is a type of view, if that's what you're talking about. So it is a content view, and it could, TV shows list could be inside of the content folder. So content, TV shows list, and then like almost like another layer, but it's definitely inside views right now. That's where it is. Okay. Going back. So models. So models, remember we kind of talked about two models we defined. One of them is a user model that we started off with, and then we defined TV show. And TV show, we made it into an interface, and we said that TV show has two components. Okay, so did we do it right? Are you, because Kyle, you're saying is it should be inside of, sorry, just to answer Kyle's question here. It is a content view, but just to let you know, the reason why I split this off is so that way we could certainly put it in here inside of content. It's definitely inside of views already, but I've made it separate just so that way we don't have to look at all the content files right now, just to look at this, just to, for simplicity. That's the reason. But yes, you could certainly organize this the way you like. And there is no necessarily a convention for doing this beyond what I'm showing you here. But yes, you could definitely do that. Okay, going back to this then, we created a model, and the model is basically telling us how our data is formatted. One is we want to define a TV show and what that is. And there's two parts to it that we've defined, the title and a studio. Okay, those are the two things we've defined. Okay, so the title and the studio, or the way that the data is going to be shown to us. And that's exactly what's happening here. If we look at our TV shows list, you can see that there is a TV show title and the studio is here. Okay, we also have something else funny that's going on here, which is our ID, right? And this ID is something that is being generated, right? We don't really care what the ID is, right? Because all we're doing is we're counting how many of these we have. And inside of our content, right, which is in our TV shows list, what we're doing is we're taking the index from the map, we're taking the index, and we're using that as the ID. Okay, we're showing an ID of 0, 1, 2, 3, or whatever it is. But realistically, we really don't care, right? It's just the data that we want to show, title and studio and so on. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. And the way we did this was we had a table, and we had an area that was a repeatable row that we used a map function, right, to loop through each of the items in the TV shows array. The TV shows array, or I don't know, collection, if you will, that's what it is. The TV shows collection is a collection of TV show objects, right? And each TV show object is defined inside of our data. This is our data. So this is a TV show object. Here's another TV show object, and so on. There's a list of objects here, and that's what they are. So that's what we did. We read from this file, and we did it by using Axios. Now, I'm just going to take a pause here for a second, and I want to talk about what Elena asked, right? Which was, well, you know, you showed us how to use, you know, kind of Bootstrap. Is there another way of doing it? Do we have to use Bootstrap styles and so on? And the answer is no, you can modify the styles any way you like. So if I go back to our content, let's go back to our homepage. You can see that the homepage has Bootstrap styles, right? But remember, you can always modify any of this stuff that we have here by importing and creating your own CSS. Remember that the CSS files, if we look at back at the app.tsx, you have Bootstrap here. Here's Bootstrap and Font Awesome. And then you have this other import that happens at the bottom, just like we would in a regular website, app.css. Our app.css is blank. But if I was to hook into something that I wanted to change site-wide or app-wide, I might want to put it right here. But what if I wanted to change something for that particular page? Let's suppose I only want it to be available just for the home page and nowhere else, right? I could make my own app.c or my own home.css page, kind of CSS right here inside of the content folder. Conventions, going with what Kyle was just asking, you could have a subfolder for each of the components. So you could say content and then a subfolder called about, where you have two components inside that subfolder, an about.tsx and then an about.css. Okay, you could do that if you want it to be super organized. Here, I've kind of created a very basic content where we're using Bootstrap, but you could use any kind of structure you want here in terms of your own CSS. So let's suppose I did that. Let's make a file called home.css. So here's home.css, right? Again, I might want to, if I was being more organized, I might want to combine these two things into its own subfolder, right? But for now, let's just use this. So just like we did here in our app.tsx, we're going to import our app.css, whatever that, it's like this that we're doing here in our home, right? So if I did this, and I said, well, I want to import, like our home CSS right now is empty, but let's say I want to import that file, and I can do that. I can say something like import, and then I want to say / kind of like our home.css. I could do that, right? And what this does is it allows me to use styles that are defined here in our home.css specifically for this page, right? So let's suppose that I want the ID of welcome header, let's modify our welcome header, and I want you guys to help me out. Okay, let's suppose I want to modify something here that we have, or so that that this thing looks a little different, okay, than Bootstrap gives us. Let's see if we can do that. Let's see if we can change our font or our size or something here. It's something easy. So how would I do that? And I've got some people here that know CSS pretty good. What would I do if I wanted to modify something with an ID of welcome header? What would I do? By the way, you can do this any place. You don't have to do it here. You could do it in your app.css. You can also do it in your index.csx. It's up to you. Yeah, that's right. So if I wanted to kind of start off, let's do what Kyle's telling me. So if I say something like welcome header, right? And then, we have our stuff. So we're saying, hey, look inside the welcome header. This is our query that we're doing in our CSS, and we're looking here in our welcome header, and we're targeting this. And now, how do I change the welcome headers? No problem. How do I change the welcome header components? Well, like the other CSS, if I want to say, let's add a border, right? And I want to say that the border color, right, is something like, I don't know, black. So make a black border around this thing. And if I just did this, right, and, is it sufficient to change something here in our code, right? So if I go back to our page, as an example, and I go back to home, does it change anything? That's right. So let's figure this out. So I'm targeting this thing right here, and, I want to change it. So what else could we do? Give me the code for it. So I want to say border width. And let's say the border width is, I don't know, 1 pixel. All right, something that's fixed, the fixed width. Okay, so again, I go back and, okay, remarkably, it doesn't show up, right? And then solid black, sure. So 1 pixel, solid, right? And if I wanted to do that, and I can do that all at once, let's say like he did. So let's say if I do something like border, and then I'll say something like 1 pixel, or let's say 2 pixels, solid black, right? And if I did that kind of thing, is it going to take effect? I'm targeting the welcome header. So this is where it is, right? Welcome header. That's the element that I'm targeting, right? And this is what I want to do. And you can see now, there it is, right? See how it's targeted? So I specifically just do it right for this one page. And that gives us a lot of options, right, for this. That means that I can do a page-specific CSS file, right? So again, this is for you, Elena. Anything you want can be in here, and you can target anything, any element that's on this page only if you really want to, right? Oh yeah, this is the component right here. This is the component I'm targeting, right? So, and I'm doing it right in here. And like I suggest, maybe what you want to think about, if we're going to go there, if we're going to do a CSS for each page, right? Then you may, inside the component content header, let's suppose we made a new folder. If we were going to go there, I might do something like home, right? And inside my home, I drag and drop my home CSS and my home TSX inside there. And so the content would have subfolders with all the pages that I want, okay? We're not doing that today. And I'm just showing you that because I was asked to do that. You can make any style you want. You can apply anything you want to any of the components, and you can add anything you want here like normal. So, and I mean that, like anything you put in there. Let's suppose I also want to target the not just the border, but what if I said the font size, right? So if I said something like the, let's go here. And if I said something like, you know, font weight or whatever, how would I do this normally? So if I was going to, like, as we normally do things, how do I change the font size or the font colors? What do I do, right? So if I was to do something like, you know, font size or font weight, right? And let's say my font size is going to be, I don't know, 40 pixels. All right, let's just say, right? So again, you can target that and you know, you can make it to whatever it's going to be, right? And then if you want to say font weight, let's say make it something bigger, like letter 4. Now remember, what you're also doing is because you're changing a style, right, that is controlled by Bootstrap, you need to fight with Bootstrap a little bit because you are updating Bootstrap's style. Anything that Bootstrap is touching, if you're changing it because they're making it an H1 tag, you need to basically make it important. And that's the stuff. But let's suppose I wanted to make something like, I don't know, 80 pixels. That's insane, right? Like way bigger than normal. Well, you can see again, it totally works, right? You can make it whatever you want. And then again, you can make it so that the font weight, right, is bold, right? So you can make it so it's really, really solid or whatever. You can totally target only one word with a span tag. There's lots of ways you can do things. And anything that you do here with CSS will apply to a tag just like normal. Okay, any kind of element that you have here on the page. Okay, does that help at all? Sure. Does it help at all, Elena? Like that you can do that? Is that more confusing, or does it clear some of the air for you? Okay, good. But again, we digress. I'm just showing you this because if I wanted to do this, I could for each of the pages. I'm not going to do this right now because that's not the focus of my work today. But that is definitely something we could do. And if I just delete that, we can go back to what we're doing. And we don't need this anymore. But remember, we can also do that same stuff in our app.css or inside of our index.css. I recommend, actually, if you're going to modify pages, you do it here in your, you know, about.css, contact.css, home. And the reason why you want to do this for each individual page is you can be very specific. However, if it's a global style, if it's something that your entire app is going to use, like for all the, you know, the stuff that you want to put together, you want to put it in your app CSS so you don't like duplicate what you're doing, right? Like something that is global, that you, for example, you want all elements that have a class of, you know, COMP2112 to have a specific style. Well, as an example, then you wouldn't want to put it here inside of your content CSS. You'd want to put it in your either in your app.css or in your index.css. Okay, that's how you would make it work. All right, so that is kind of how things knit together, right? That you can attach things the way you want them to. Elena was actually talking about services, and she said, well, I don't kind of get what's going on here. Why do we need all these extra files? Remember what we tried to do with our HTTP common is we wanted to use Axios. And really, if you think about what this HTTP common is, it's really the Axios instance. That's what it is. I could have renamed this thing, to Axios instance. And let's just do that so that it's easy for you to think about what it is. I'm going to call it Axios instance, right? And when I say Axios instance, if I rename it this way, and I did a refactor, like a rename, right? Then any place that uses Axios instance, right, is going to also be renamed. So for example, here in TV shows list, it changed to Axios instance. So that's what HTTP means, right? And really, if you think about it, I could have used just Axios, the name Axios here, axios.get, right? But here I'm using HTTP because we're using the HTTP protocol to get something from our TV shows.json. Okay, that's what's happening here. The Axios instance defines a couple of things here: the base URL, where we're looking for the data, okay, and then some additional configuration, which again, these are optional. These are options. When I create my instance, what I'm doing is I'm instantiating. I'm actually creating an object right here. If I had another model, yes, I would. Wherever I'm looking for the data is what I'm changing here. Maybe what I'd do is I'd make another instance. If I have multiple things I'm looking at the same time, Kyle, I might do, maybe either two things. One, if I have multiple things I'm looking at in here with Axios, I might define different little functions, right? If I want to create different, a bunch of different ones, and then I would say something like, again, instead of Axios instance, I might call this something like Axios common, where I might have, let's say I'm creating an instance for not just the file I'm looking at, but other files or other locations or whatever it's going to be. Okay, yes. That is a question as well, right? So to me, I'm more of I'm on the side of in one folder with all the assets, but then organizing it in exactly what I do too, with what Kyle is saying. I might break it into public assets, and under assets I might have images, and under images I might be very specific if I wanted to break it out. That's mostly how I would do it. It's kind of a public asset, and you could definitely do it here, but remember that this is just JavaScript. This is where all your JavaScript and CSS live typically, and I normally put anything like images and other things in here, right, inside of my my public folder, right? So that's where I would put it. Okay, no problem. Any other questions before we move on for what we're doing today? So that's kind of what we talked about. So the Axios instance instantiates an object of type Axios. Remember Axios, this Axios instance, it returns a promise, right? And I talked about how I like Axios more because it's only one line as opposed to multiple promises. But all I'm doing is I'm creating a wrapper so that I don't have to put this whole thing in here, our base URL, over and over again. I don't want to do that. That's why this is here, right? It's almost like a global variable that I'm accessing every single time, or a global function. So my TV shows list is a data service. And the reason why I made this data service, and right now all it does is read, is I'm going to have other functions in here too: create, update, and delete. Those, kind of four little things that I want in here. Right, and I want a central location. So if ever I want to read the TV show list or do anything with the TV shows, I can do it from one location. I don't have to do this way, right? I could simply just go into my TV shows list and then just do http.get right in here, right? For example, when I'm doing the data that I'm doing here, right, which is happening in the read TV shows, I could just do everything in here instead, right? I found that when I break it out like this, it becomes easier to read your code, right? Although there are a lot of connections that you have to make, right? Yeah, so pathing is exactly what Kyle says. The pathing needs to change because what happens is it has to know where you're looking or your, for the stuff you have for your images. Again, it takes a little bit of trial and error to make it work, but mostly what you do is you put it inside of public, just like we did in our data for in our Axios instance, right? You have to kind of play with the instance, the base URL that you're using for your data, and also for your images and assets. Okay, so other questions before we move on? I don't want to move on until you guys are clear. Hey, if it works for you, Sarah, I'm okay with it. Sometimes people do that too. I've also seen structures where, like I said, if I was going to go into kind of our content folder, and I made subfolders here, that's where it would work best, as an example. Okay, so that means that, let's say if you were going to do what you did, maybe what you'd want to do is set up a subfolder here for, let's say, about, and if you had images for your about page, you could have kind of a subfolder, and then only the images for that about page would be here. A lot of people like it that way as well, as opposed to a centralized location, because then it's more element or component specific. So both ways work well, and I've seen it done both ways, both the way Kyle's talking about and the way you're talking about. Okay, so you didn't do it wrong, is what I'm saying. All right, so that is okay. And same thing with Elena. Elena did it there. You could also do it there as well. All right, any other questions or things that you need to clear up like Elena said, she wants to clear up the mud a little bit, to clear it up, some of the stuff that we're doing here, how we're making this work. And again, there's lots and lots of stuff that we are not talking about, kind of in our course, because we can only talk about some of the things due to the time that we have, right? And I mean that only because React itself is very large. There's so many little pieces to it, and there's stuff that we can't possibly cover. We can't cover everything. But you can explore. But the idea here is that I'm giving you some information, and then from this, when you go into the next course, which is more of a backend course with Node.js and Express, we can explore how this all works. Okay, interesting. Thanks, Kyle, for that. All right, so any other questions around the stuff that we're doing? Please, guys, this is the time. Even if you want to come on the mic, you can do it, because I'm going to move on to something more, a little different than this. Okay, what about state and use effect? So those are React hooks that we're talking about, right? And if I go back to our views, and if I go back to our content, let's go into our I think the contact page is probably the best example of this, right? So one thing with React hooks is, when you want to maintain state, when you want to get access to different elements, remember that any element on the page, any part of the page itself that's being generated, like stuff that's inside of your HTML here, curly braces allow you to inject value. Okay, that's what it does. And for forms and those kind of things, you have a lot of built-in event handlers and event listeners that help us out with this, right? What we want to do is we want to keep track of the data that we're getting from the form within the page itself without having to reload the page, right? So because we're using a single page application structure, useState allows us to get our data and store it in memory, as an example. And we can do that as we're typing things in, very similar to what we can do with JavaScript, but that's what useState allows us to do. It allows us to manipulate, set up a kind of a place to put our data, for example, full name, contact number, email address, and message. And then it also establishes a setter. So this pair is what this is. It's called a pair. We actually destructure or decompose our useState data. useState actually is almost like a way of initializing. When we use the useState method itself, it initializes the data by whatever I put in here. It uses the set full name method, whatever this is called. You name this, and you create all the names for this yourself. The convention is the holder of data is usually in lowercase, for example, full name. And the setter of the data, the way almost like the way you set the data or change the data is you use put set in the beginning, and then you camel case the original data member, the variable. So it says full name. So set full name and full name. That's just a convention of how you name it. Use state stores whatever you put in here. This is the initializer inside of your data. So let's say, for example, I went to the contact form and I had some initial data, like something like my name, right? And I put in, contact number. Let's say I put in like, something like 555-5555. I did that. And my email address, which is, my name @example.com. And if I did that here, right? And in my message, I said some message, right? And if I press save here, and if I go back to my contact page, you can see that what I want to do is get that data and output it out here. The reason why, of course, it's not working is because I haven't enabled the value to go in there, right? So what we could do is, now that I've initialized, this happens one time when you enter the page, it initializes, right? And if I go down here, what I could do is I could take the value of what that is and I can change it. Now, be careful. Once you change the value, it's set. It's hard for you. This is going to happen every time it refreshes, and it's constantly refreshing. So let's suppose I just want to put that value in there and say something like value is equal to, and then the name, let's put it on the next line for you to see it. If I say something like value is equal to, and because this is the full name, I put in something like full name right here. Then if I press save, you're going to see that it changes to my name. And if I try and change this, I can, right? I can change this to whatever I want it to be, but initially it'll be whatever that value that I set up here is, right? So if whatever value I use up here, my name, let's just put Tom, right? To show you, to really be explicit here so you can see it. Then this value here is what's initializing. So if it's Tom in here, you can see that Tom changes up here, right? So that's the value that comes in. And initially, and that's only if I use the value property or attribute of my form control, right? And you can see the curly braces injects the data that I store inside of my full name here, inside of my form. So that's the way we can do that. And it's very, very interactive. Now, one thing that React does that's different than Angular is it uses, oh, absolutely, I agree with you. Just doing a very ugly example where you can use the placeholder instead. Let's say if you wanted to do that, and you want it to say the placeholder, let's not, instead of enter your full name, let's just do that here. So let's say I said that here placeholder is in curly braces what we want it to be. So if I say something like full name, I could, I could put the placeholder as whatever the full name is. And if I did that, it's going to have the same effect, right? Where I can, kind of, if I refresh, I could type over this and it's just going to replace whatever's inside the, the full name. So instead of enter your contact number or whatever, that placeholder, it's a good example of how to do that. If you wanted to put in some basic values in here, like for example, enter your full name, enter your full name, you can put that up here and then it would just inject it into here, right? So that's kind of a way of doing it. And useState allows us to play with that data. One thing where React is different than Angular that you're going to find out when you work with Rich is that what React does, I'm going to just change those back to what it was. What React does is it does a single, kind of, instead of a two-way data binding, it does a one-way data binding, okay? Whereas Angular does a two-way data binding, okay? So that's what it allows you to do, is anything you change in real time is changed in the app, right? Which is something that happens right away. And we'll talk about that. Well, actually, you'll talk about that with Rich I'm just going to go back to changing this back to what it was. There we go. And you can see that's back to normal. But anything I put in here is injected or bound to that particular form control, right? That's what happens, right? And I can do it with curly braces. I also did little events. I made little events that happen here. You don't have to do it this way. you can actually do it inline. So for example, what we did here last day is we went into onChange and we used this, we called a, kind of a method here, but you could simply do the method right in here. So if I can almost make an anonymous method for onChange full name to something that looks just like, kind of something that is like curly braces. I could do that. I can say something like, when I do that onChange, then I can set the name, something like set full name, or whatever to whatever I want, kind of the value. I could do that all right here, right? So as opposed to doing it in here, which is kind of doing it inline, I elected to do it in some kind of a method instead, and that's why it looks like this. Okay, but you can certainly do it in a different way than I've done it. Okay. So again, curly braces, what it does is injects of some kind of function or value inside of wherever the curly brace is inside of our JSX. That's what it does. And that, for the most part, is in a very high level how you use state. Use state, basically allows you to set data in the form where it's not lost. As an example, as you move from control to control, and we can actually use this data to save it or change it or post something with the form data itself. Use effect is like an event handler, and it triggers when we first come to this page. And you can also, inside of this area right here, you can specify a dependency that it looks at. So whenever I change, use state, of, let's say I change the full name, right? If that is changed, then use effect will trigger again. And I can put that in there. I can say something like, well, I want full name. I want to watch full name here. Let's suppose I put the dependency to watch full name. Then, and let's do a console log. Let's do a console log. Every time I go there, I'll say something like effect, and then I'll say something like full name change, right? And just to show you how this works for use effect, it's an event handler. And I'm telling it to only depend on the full name, like dependency. So if I go back here, you can see that it says contact, right? And let's just do a Control-Shift-J to see that. You can see that here is right here, the effect full name change. If I go in here and I start typing, right? So if I start typing like, Tom, you can see every single time I call Tom, right, or anything in here, it's going to trigger my effect because I'm watching this full name variable, and I've told it to watch by just putting it inside here, right? It's not going to do the same thing with contact number. If I put this same contact number, it doesn't trigger the effect. It triggers something else that we made it do, but it doesn't trigger the effect at all. If I wanted to trigger the effect for full name and contact number, then I would just list it here in this array. So say full name, and I also want to watch contact number. If I said that, then every time full name or contact number is changed, and let's just refresh the page for a second, then you can see that I can do something like, well, and let me just say, you can make a console log or an effect to output which one has changed, right? But we'll just say effect, we'll say full name, or it's either full name or contact number changed. So if one of these two things changes, it's going to trigger this little function to run again over, right? And again, you can see that if I did that, if I say something like here, let's type in there, that's good. If I type in here, it'll also trigger, but if I type in here, it won't, right? You can see that that's not doing what I'm telling it to do. That's doing something else. Okay, so that is in many ways how use effect works. Use effect is almost like a little event handler that triggers the first time that you enter this page, and for anything else you list here inside of the dependency array, which is what we put in here. Okay, does that clarify that for you, How it works? Well, that's because as we enter stuff, right, and what I'm doing is on change contact number, I'm outputting to the log, right, and I haven't finished putting in, I haven't changed something before I output it. So I set the contact number and then I output the contact number, right, or whatever the parts of the contact number are. But until I move away from the contact number and blur, so until I move from, here to there, notice if I even do that, it keeps on, kind of emitting this too. That's why I haven't seen everything there. It's the way I'm doing it, the way I'm using the change event. By the way, this is a little annoying, and I think we can get rid of some of these right now. So it only doesn't show these like this, right? It only shows the last value, which is the submit value right here. Okay, so that's what it's going to do. But you can see here, if I was to go back and if I refresh now, and if I put in Tom or T, and then I modified this one, nothing happens here in the email address. But if I modify this one because we're watching it, it's going to show me that again. Okay. So that is how useEffect works. useEffect has something called a dependency array, which is right here. And this dependency array allows this function to be triggered over and over and over again. It only happens once when you enter the component, but then it can happen over and over again as we go. Any other questions around the stuff that we've talked about? Hopefully that clarifies some stuff too. Yes, you can, but remember that we're going to have to mention, if I'm going to update the this value inside of here, this only triggers once, right? So the only time that you'd want this is if it listened to something else, right? Like, let's say, for example, I was listening to the on submit form to change when this is triggered, right? Again, you can also put in functions in here, right? So if I'm listening to on submit form and I want to update something like this from my useEffect, I could do it. But the question is, what problem are you trying to solve, right? Remember, again, the only time it's going to update these, because this only triggers one time unless you specify something else, is if, for example, let's say useEffect is here and you want to initialize one of these values or whatever on start, but then you're doing it here anyway, like you're doing that here, right? So I don't see how that would be could you? Yes. Would you want to? Unless you had some kind of dependency that you listed here to update them again, you wouldn't. Okay. I think it's time to move on. But again, I want to ask you one more time. Any other questions around our structure, which is something that, it might mess you up? If there's none, let's move on now, because again, I don't want to dwell too much more. So last time what we did was we had a little file, and we had the little file in our data, but that's not really helpful to us whatsoever. I would like to do full CRUD. So create, read, update, delete. We're able to do read from this file because it's just a flat file like this. But it'd be nice if we can update stuff. We can do things other than this. And there's two ways we can do that. We can certainly use a cache-like system like local storage that we've done before, or we can use a real-time database. And without too much overhead, let's set one up together, okay? And this is your in-class exercise for today. So this week. So let's do this together. So for this, we're going to use something called Firebase. And what Firebase is a real-time database that's used by things like Android, iOS, JavaScript, Node, and others, Unity, whatever you want. And what it creates is not just database, but it also creates things like if you wanted to host your site, you can host it here on Google's Firebase as well. We're not going to do that part. All I want to use Firebase for this example this week is just an API for saving and loading our data, right? Going to be some changes to what we've done so far, and we're going to go slow, okay? We'll see how far we can get with this thing, okay? Again, I'm not going to guarantee we're going to finish with everything else that we're doing this week, but it's just, again, to set how we do create, read, update, delete. And I'm going a little slower because, again, I want to be sensitive to people's concerns. Okay, I don't want to do that. And that's why I'm doing it the way I've done it. I probably would have gone a lot faster, but people had all these questions, and I want to make sure that your questions are answered as much as we can. So going back here then, so what is Firebase? Well, Firebase is a real-time database. It looks like this. It is hosted by Google, so that's the good thing. What I'd like you to do is I want you to set up your own Google Firebase account. And when you go there for the first time, let's go there as an incognito mode for a second. So if I was to go to Firebase for the first time, right? If I looked up Firebase and if I went there, it's not going to show me my console, my people. You have to sign in, and you would sign in with your Google account. Okay, that's what you're going to do for the first time. Okay, so hopefully you've got a Gmail account. And if you don't, you can certainly sign in or sign up. You can create an account, but all you need is your Google account to sign in. So hopefully you guys are all have a Gmail account. And if you don't, please sign up for one today. Okay, again, it can be something that you throw away if you don't like Google or whatever, but it's required for using Firebase. I'll wait for a second until you do that. First of all, how about this? I ask, does anyone not have a Gmail account? And if you don't, check mark, please. Okay, that's good. Looks like everyone has one. Now, once you've signed in, as an example, what we want to do is I want to click Get Started. And Get Started is going to take me to a place where it says Firebase Projects. I want to add a brand new project for today. So let's add a new project, right? And you can name your project what you want. I'm going to name mine COMP2112 in the fall 2022 semester. That's my project name. And I'm going to call mine week. Actually, I just might just call it that. You guys can call it whatever you want. Continue. It asks me now if I want to use something called Google Analytics. I really don't care about that, as we're not using this site as a real database. It's just for us to practice using create, read, update, and delete. So click on enable Google Analytics off. So you're not using those things. Click create project. It's going to take a second for it to provision your project. Okay, so provisioning means it's going to create a space and a collection of data online. And that space is going to create almost like a virtual server, right, online without any kind of overhead for us. Now, the reason why Firebase is so I don't know, popular, I would say, as an iOS, Android, and game kind of backend is because you really don't need any API at all. I don't need to have Express or Node.js running or anything like that. It supplies everything we need for us right here. Let's push continue. So again, all front side stuff, or all stuff that's happening on the client side as opposed to everything else. Notice here that when we launch this, and I'm not sure if yours worked like this, we have two things. One, it says that we're in a Spark plan. A Spark plan means that there's no cost every month. Okay, it's not something that we're going to pay anything. If I wanted to use the Blaze plan, then I would pay. Please don't use the Blaze plan as it's not required for this course. Okay, we just want to use the Spark plan, which is the basic free plan forever if you don't do anything crazy with it. Okay. Now there's some limitations for how this works, but for us, it's going to be just fine. It says getting started by adding Firebase to your app, right? So you can see that there are a bunch of different options here. We want to choose this option, web, all right? So I'm going to click this button right here, where it's going to take me to this add Firebase to your web app. Again, what I did was, if I went to here, I was here in my dashboard. This is what this is. And in the middle here, it's asking me about my app that I want to run or that I want to connect. And I want to make a brand new web app that I want to connect to. So this one right here. And my web app may even have the same name. I could have something like my nickname for this web app, if I want to, is going to be called something like, again, COMP2112 fall 2022 semester. If I click register app here, and if there's any problem, it's going to tell me if there's a problem, right? But it's just a nickname for the app. What it does is it provides this big, heavy-duty, kind of configuration file. We need to add this to our project. I'm going to wait and check mark when you're here, please. Okay. That's good. Tyler, Nicole. How about Andres? Are you going to follow along with me today with this one? I know you've probably done this before, but yes, cool. Thank you. And how about Mr. Taylor, Alex Taylor? Are you okay with him too? You good? Lane is watching. Okay, great. Okay, so now let's thank you for that feedback. All right, so now I've got this information and I want to use this stuff, right? And I want to use, it says use NPM. You can use NPM or Yarn here. So first, what I want to do is the first step, which is let's install Firebase to our app. So again, going back to our application right here, I want to go into our terminal window and I want to make a new terminal happen. So that's down here. And what I want to do here is do that yarn install. Now, if we remember where this is going to go, it's going to go inside of our package.json file. Here's our package.json file. Let's just add that in. So I'm going to say yarn add Firebase, just like it says here, npm install Firebase. I'm just going to do a yarn add Firebase and press enter. Okay. And we've added Firebase. Now, what I want to do is inside of our services, I want to make a Firebase-config file. Let's do that. So I'm going to say new file. We're going to call this Firebase-config. And we'll make it a TSX. Okay, Firebase-config.tsx. And again, when we make a Firebase anything TSX, we're going to break our code for a second, but that's okay. What I want to do is follow the instructions here now for the rest of it. So I'll literally just copy paste all of this, and populate it inside of here. Okay. Now, warning. Okay. What I'm showing you here is strictly for development purposes. It's not for deployment or as a professional site or anything else. And the reason for this is we are sharing our API keys here. And all this API stuff should be hidden inside of environment variables, right? So warning, this is not the way you would do it professionally, the final stage. As developers, though, we can do it temporarily and we can change it. If I put this up on GitHub, however, just FYI, then all of this is going to be up on GitHub. And that's including all this stuff, no matter how many times you save it, obscure it, whatever you're going to do it. Unless your GitHub project is private, this will show up on this altogether. Okay, so thanks, Sarah. All right, so that's what I've done here. Now it also says to do add SDKs for Firebase products that you want to use. Okay, so we're going to do this too. So let's just copy this. Let's just cut this out. So this is just our first configuration file, and we need the next piece, which is we want to add our Firebase database. Okay. In order for us to use our Firebase database, we need to create a database first online. Let's keep this file going. We're not done doing this yet, right? And we're going to go back up to here. So this is the first step. The first step is we get this information, right, as an example. And once we've got this information, it says go to console, continue to console. Back to the console. We can see our project overview. And the project overview is going to be right here, right? If I want to go to project settings, it's going to show you all that detail again, right? So this is all the... And I have this app. Notice that it says I have if I went here, if I go to project settings again, it's going to show me this page. It's going to show me the project name, the ID, the project number, the environment. Right now it's unspecified. We'll come back to that maybe later. And so on, okay? It also gives us all this information again. So if you missed it, it's right here, okay? All right. And by the way, there's also another option. It says, get the snippet for your app's Firebase config object here, if I want to. And if I clicked on this, you can see that this is just the configuration piece. It's not the entire piece, like all of this. All right, so you can specify. You can also use a CDN. So instead of using in other words, connecting it to a script, Firebase can also connect without, using NPM, right? But for us, we're using NPM and Yarn, so we're going to use it this way. Okay. But again, this doesn't matter. This is just what's showing you how it works. So this is where the configuration detail is, just in case you missed it. Awesome. Okay, so that is the app we've registered. We can add other apps. If I want to add things like iOS and Android apps that use the same data, we can do that here. But for now, we're not going to do that, right? All we care about is our little app. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next piece. I want to go on the left where it says build. And on the left, there's an option, a bunch of options here we can use. Firebase also supports machine learning and different functions, hosting if you want to host your site, storage, and a bunch of other stuff. What we want to choose is real-time database. Okay, that's what I want to choose. So real-time database says, okay, well, you want to make a database, do you? Right? Well, let's click this create database link here, right here, this button. it's going to say, well, where do you want your database to be located? And there's a few locations that Google supports. One of them is United States, which is close to us, Belgium, which is in Europe, and Singapore, which is in Asia. So those are the three data centers we can use. Obviously, we're going to use the one closest to us, which is the United States. And then I'm going to click next. Here, it says that we can start in our database. We have security rules for our database. For now, what I want to do, I think we keep on losing Kyle. For now, what we're going to do is we want to start where it says start in test mode. So where it says test mode, please click this. And it says this the default security rules for test mode allow anyone with your database reference to view, edit, and delete all data in your database for the next 30 days. Sure, let's click enable for this. And when we do that, after we're going to test mode, right, it's going to generate our database for us. The database comes with a bunch of stuff, okay, as an example. So it comes with here at the top, our data. So far, we have none. It comes with rules where we see that there are rules for when we can read and write. For now, what I want you to do is change the rules so that not only can you read and write, but they're always available for us. For now, again, this is just for us for testing. So we're going to say true, and we're going to change this to true as well. So we can read and write without any kind of special fancy authentication, and then click publish. All right, so again, the rules have changed right now so that I can always read forever. And so this is dangerous, but again, all we're doing is we're just creating our database and we're just using it for an example for React, and that's why we're doing it this way. Again, warning, this is not what you would do in a real case, all right? So again, data, empty, rules, everything is open. Okay, that's what we just did. Okay, again, I'm going to check back to you guys. Are you with me? Check mark if you're with me, X if you're not, somehow. And Kyle, I think you disconnected and connected. And are you okay with us right now? Hopefully you are. All right. Okay, no problem. Again, we're up on YouTube anyway, so you can always go and watch the stream. All right, so the thing is, so this is what we've done so far. We need some data. All right, and we could definitely post data, but we haven't done that yet with our code. I want to create some data that we can read, and I'm going to talk about how we're going to do it, and then we'll discuss positives and negatives around this. So one is we need to finish off our configuration. So here you can see the link to our configuration is right here. This is our actual database. Whatever yours says might be different than mine. It should be, right? I'm going to click this little link here. I'm going to copy the reference URL right here. Go back to our kind of here. And what I want to put in here is another object that says database URL. And I'm going to populate that with the link we just got from our database. Okay, so I just kind of added this to my Firebase configuration. Save. Next, I want to say that I want to import. And I'm going to say get database, right? And I want to do this from our Firebase /database. Okay, that's what I want to do. And get database, what it's going to do is it's a function that allows me to connect with a Firestore or Firebase database. That's what it does. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to use the next line here. So when we configure our database, this is, configure, or it will say initialize our database down here. The way we're going to do it, we're going to put a new const. We're going to call it DB, and we're going to say that DB is equal to our get database, where I pass in the app to our database. Okay, that's what we're going to do. So we're going to take the database information, database URL. And we're going to create our database link and put the app here, the app. We're going to pass that into our database. And what I want to do is at the end, I want to export this. This is the thing that I really want. Okay, I want to export the database. And I'm using this configuration to export the database object, as an example here. I can export whatever I want. I can export app. I can export the Firebase config, whatever I want here. But here I'm just exporting the DB. All right. Let's put this up on GitHub and GitHub my complaint. Let's see what happens. So git add dot git commit -m. I'll say added Firebase support and git push. Let's see what happens to Git when it happens. And you might receive a message sometimes where, well, you know what, your API has been released, and you know, all this kind of stuff that you might get a message from Google telling you that, right? That, hey, this is dangerous what you're doing, because anyone can go in here with my credentials and go mess things around, right? Again, we're not really putting anything that's, you know, a high security database that's with any data that's going to be, you know, missed or sensitive right now. But if it was, again, one more warning, this is not the way you would do it. Okay, you would put these environment variables inside of your server. For example, for us, it would be in render.com. We make a bunch of environment variables here and would use those. Okay, or we'd make my GitHub repository private, and you wouldn't have this issue. Okay, so this is what we've done so far. So once we've created this, now what I want to do is I want to use my database. I want to use my database where I want to use it in my Axios instance. That's what I want to use. I want to change this. Instead of us looking at our data that's here, we don't want to look at data here anymore. We want to look at data that's online, right? I want to test this out and see if it's going to work the exact same way, right? Well, there's two things. We need to structure our data online so it kind of looks like this. It kind of looks like this, right? However, you know, Firebase is not an array by default of anything. It has, and if you notice, even it's not even structured in any way. There's no structure to it at all, right? We need to create our structure a little bit, right? And here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to go to this link here, right? And notice this little plus right here, right next to it. I want you to click this plus. And it's going to ask me for key value pairs for my my object. My object that I'm going to put in here is the collection name I'm going to use, okay? And the collection name is going to be TV shows. So TV shows is the collection name, okay? And then in the value area, there's a little pull down, right? I want you to pull down this little value and change it to object, okay? So TV shows is now an object, okay? And then what I want to do is next to TV shows that's been, you know, kind of pulled down as an object, I want you to click this little plus button again. And then this is going to have a sub-object of my TV shows object, right? So the sub-object that I want in here is the key value pair of how I'm going to set up each TV show. I can't really do it this way anymore. It's almost like I need an extra piece of data, right? I need an ID for each TV show as well. Okay, that's what I need. And that's what I want to put in here. It's almost like the key is going to be my ID, right? And my data is going to be, you know, kind of inside this other little object, right? So the key that I'm going to use right now, I'm just going to use a numeric key, but it doesn't have to be numeric, right? I'm just going to use the key that is 0. Let's start off with key 0, right? And the value, look what it says here. It could be string, an object, a number, auto, which is going to automatically generate my options. If I put auto, that means instead of me generating what the value is going to be, it's going to generate it for me. A lot of times, the value that we're going to put in here, instead of like 0, as an example, you know, it could have a random value. For us, we're just going to make it so that it is an object again, okay? And inside of there, we're going to put in another level. So we're going to say the title. Let's put the title of one of our TV shows. You can always refer back to this if you want. So we can say House of the Dragon, right? And let's just populate that in there, right? And then again, next to the plus, next to the 0, you can press this plus, right? And then you can put the studio. So again, studio, right? And we can put that in there and we can rebuild some of this, not all of it, but let's rebuild some of it so that it's back to normal. So there's HBO and we put this in there. Hey, there it is, right? Let's do one more. If I click, in order for me to complete this one, I need to click add, right? And once I've clicked add, this is the structure you're going to see here. All right, so TV shows 0. So that's the 0th key, right? And then inside here, I have, for this key, I have studio and title. The studio is HBO and the title is House of the Dragon, okay? So this is kind of the first one. Now, if you made a mistake, and if by chance you erase any one of these things, let's say you erase this one for sure, it'll also erase TV shows. You got to start from scratch. Okay. So that's something you can do. Notice I can also delete this, which is deleting all this. Okay. So you could do that, but you'd have to start from here anyway. So again, I'm going to go back to you guys, and are you with me? Have you done this? Have you got one TV show up online? Okay, that's good. Thank you. Let's add one more. So we'll have two, right? So again, to add another one, we're going to collapse this part, right? And we're going to go here and we're going to add another one. We're going to do the same procedure. So 1 instead of 0. Again, you can name it whatever you like, to be honest with you. It doesn't really matter what this is. And we're going to make it curly braces. And then we're going to click this plus, and we're going to, for the key, again, we're going to say title. And for the value, we're just going to check the second one, which is Andor. Again, an awesome series, in my opinion. And we'll put that in there. And we'll click on plus again, and we'll say studio, right? And we'll put that in there. And then next to the studio, we'll have the studio, which is Disney, and we'll put that in there. Okay, so that is the, the way it is. I'm ready to click add now. And when I click add, now we have our second item in the list. Okay, so we have two items. Yay, House of the Dragon and Andor. Fantastic. Now that I have data, I want to be able to read this data. And we need to change our structure. So we, instead of reading from our file, which is this, instead of reading from this thing, this data file, I want to use Axios to read from Firebase. Okay, how do we do that? So back to my Axios instance. So my Axios instance, remember we had our Firebase config right here. And I have my Axios instance right here, right? So what I want to do is I want to use my base URL here, and I want to read from my base URL when I'm doing this stuff, right? So in my Axios instance, I want to import, and I want to import db from / and Firebase config. All right, so that's what I want to do there. All right, so once I've got my DB, now I want to replace my base URL, this base URL here. I want to replace this thing with db dot, and then now I want you to think about what this is. If I go to db, right, now it says Firebase config, right? So really what I want to do is put this in curly braces. Here's my curly braces. And I want to go db dot, and you can see automatically I have app, db.app.options dot, and then if I go and type in database URL, there it is, right? So that's what I want to put in there, db.app.options.database URL. Save. All right. Let's put this up on GitHub. So this is the change we made so far. So I'm going to say git add dot, git commit -m, and I'll say updated the Axios instance with the database URL. Git push. Okay, so you have that too. All right, great. So we've modified Axios, so now it looks at a different spot. It looks here in our database URL. Our database URL we defined as this long line right here. So it's actually a real-time database we're using now, as opposed to a dummy little database. But the real-time database, we need to make some changes here, because if I go back to our data service, which is this, it says that I want to return an array of TV show type. Ooh, wow. That is not how our data is structured anymore. It's not actually structured this way. It's structured like this, where I say something like, I have a number, right? For example, I have something like an ID, right? And then whatever that ID is, for example, things like, this is how it's really structured now. My ID is structured like this. So it's a kind of an array this ID is an object, and inside that I have this object that's inside this object. Okay, that's kind of how it's like. And it's not really necessarily like this. It's kind of like I have two objects inside of this object. It's almost like I want me just undo that. It's almost like I want to say that I've labeled each object with its own name, right? So it's almost like I've done this. I've said that this is an array and this is the object that I have right here. This is kind of what I'm doing, right? Where I'm saying 0 is pointing to this thing. Okay, that's what it is. And in many ways, it's kind of like its own little array of objects, but that's kind of what it's like. I'm no longer doing it the other way around. And in fact, this whole collection is also something that looks like this now. So I've kind of made it so that there's a collection called TV shows, right? And that is an array and I want to take all of this stuff and I want to put, it's an array of objects. That's what this is, right? So it's an object array. And it's almost like I'm doing this. I'm saying that this object array is something that looks like this. That is what it looks like right now. So there's the outside ID, and each ID is going to look like this. So this is the second one. And it's just an object of objects, right? That's what I'm kind of saying it's going to be doing. So it's going to restructure our data, right? So that each one of these things is going to have its own little ID here. That's what this number is, 0, 1, 2, 3, or whatever, right? Its own little external ID, okay? So TV shows is no longer of type TV show, right? Remember, we made our model. Our model is of type TV show. There's our TV show model. But our model now is, well, kind of defunct, right? It has a title and a studio, right? But it also has some kind of ID. So what I need to do, going back to I'm just going to undo these changes here. I just want to show you what it looks like really, right? And this whole thing, all right? I want to show you what it looks like. It's no longer looking like this data, okay? Just to give you a sense of it, because you can clearly see that if I go back online, you can see that this is not structured the same way, right? You have a 0 and a 1 here, and that's not how we had it before, right? And it's almost as if, right, I want to create data. What if I did it in a different way? Now, this is interesting. And it's interesting in that Firebase you can create data in any way you like. Let's suppose I add another piece of data and I add a key and a value and so on. And let's say I make it something like 2, right? And if I did that and pressed, kind of another one underneath 2, right? I made this, instead of an object, I made it a string. So I need to put something in that string, right? Or what if I made it so that it is a, like 2 is a string, and inside there, I did the same thing. I mean, either way, you're going to see it's the same structure. It's not, there's no way of doing this without having it, or else studios and titles are going to be all on the same line. There's no reference to how this binds together, right? This is what binds it together, this 0, 1, 2, whatever it's going to be. And I could certainly make this, instead of it being 0, 1, I can certainly make this random numbers, right? So a random structure here, but it really doesn't matter, as you'll see. So knowing that, then, if I go back to my TV show list data service, right, it's no longer an array of TV show. Yes, it would be nice if it was like that. It's really an array of objects. And to show you this, if I press save here, let's just press save and not do anything, no changes. And if I go back out to my to my TV show list, it's going to be blank, right? It's going to be blank here. And it tells us that what's the problem? It says that access to this, it says it's redirected from this. It says original localhost 3 hasn't been blocked by a course policy, no access control, allow origin, header is present on the request resource. And it says Axios error. This is the biggest problem. It says Axios error, that we don't have access to the, to the database, right? So that's the first thing. It doesn't have access. And I'm just going to check to see if I got any errors or warnings and all that kind of stuff. It shouldn't. So does that make sense? So we don't have access. That's the first thing. Okay. It tells us we don't have access. It says because redirected from this. And the reason for it is because of our string has to be made again. See in here, we have to specify where we're looking at. So where it says in our TV show list data service, we need to specify we're looking inside of TV shows, right? So here we're going to put in, and this is what I want you to type in, TV shows.json. Now you're going to say, why JSON, right? Save, please save. This is in our read. So HTTP GET, same thing, nothing changed yet. And it says TV shows.json. If I go back out to my page now, and if I refresh, right, we're getting our data. We're getting our data, right? Somehow it figured it out, right? Did it figure it out for you? Because I didn't make any changes. I literally didn't change a damn thing. Just this. Right? It's not beautiful, right? It's a beautiful thing because all we told it was where to get stuff from, okay? That's all we told it. And we didn't really point in any other way. So this is where Axios is really powerful in many ways. By the way, you could do the same thing with fetch, right? But I find that Axios is better when we're going to do all these little operations. It's really simple. It does a lot of the decoding for us, and it does return an array of 2 elements, right, with studio and title. But it also includes this 0 and 1, right, which is, you know, problematic. It's going to become problematic later. Okay, here's 1 and 2. Now, what I want to do with this next part is let's update this on GitHub, right? So again, so I'm going to click clear, git add dot, git commit -m. Yes, absolutely. And we're going to say updated. Updated our TV show list data service read method, which is what we did, right? Okay, so you want the GitHub, the configuration, the Axios config, or the Firebase config. There it is. Now yours is going to be different than mine. All this will be different looking than mine. You'll have your own, right, when you set this up. Good. So again, very little changes, and I'm pointing now at a data source with the same, you know, kind of structure that we had before. I'm pointing at it up online, right? Which is kind of interesting. I want to add a way of creating data, right? And I want to add the data into a post request. I want to start configuring a post request now for me because I want to start adding new data in here. So how do I do that? Let's go back to my TV show list data service, and then we'll take a short break, okay? In my create method, we don't have it yet. I want to start typing my create method. So it's going to be a public create method, right? And my public create method is going to take in a couple things. The data, which is of type TV show. So one piece of data is what I want to create, right? And I'm going to return the http.post request. I want to make a post request that takes in one piece of data, the TV show itself that I want to post, right? And once I post the TV show, I need to pass it a URL string and the data that I want. So it's going to be, here's the URL string, okay, that I want to add in here. Now, I want to think about this for a second. It's still my TV show's data, right? Still my TV show's data that I want to put in here, right? So I'm going to do that. And it's almost like I want to take in data that I'm going to output. So TV shows.json is where I'm going to post it. I need the URL string, right? And we don't need anything else right now. We're just going to use, because there is no backend, right? So we just need this TV shows.json every single time. So that is where I'm going to put it, right? And when I create, I want to do this. And what I want to do also is I want to pass in the data that I need to create. So I want to say data is where it's going to go. Okay, that's where the data that I'm kind of using, right? And for now, I want to stop right there. So I want to say data is the data that I want to post inside of my TV shows online, right? So every time I do a create, right? So I'll call this the create method from my TV show list data service. I'm going to create, you know, kind of this thing or post data up online, Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Let's go back to, sorry, I'm just reading that message. This, make sure that you have this piece, right? And make sure that you have this piece. And again, you can find all this stuff. You can all this stuff on GitHub as well. That's weird that you're getting that error. Cannot find module Firebase app or its corresponding type declarations. Did you install Firebase before? So if you can't find this, that'd be a problem, right? That's what this is. It's basically telling you that you can't find your Firebase app. This part, right? Okay, so I'm going back to the next piece, which is okay, no problem. I'll take one more thing and we'll stop here. So then, how do I add stuff now that I've got my data service? How do I add things, to my to everything else I want? Well, my TV show list doesn't really have an add function. It doesn't have that, right? And so what I want to do is I need some method to do that. So in my TV shows list, right? I need some kind of link to take me there to allow me to add new piece of data. I'm going to do this right underneath the right underneath this column area, right? So again, where it says call, I would say you're right, Kyle. Yeah. So a column right in here. I'm just also going to just restructure this thing so it kind of moves in one. There we go. Underneath my column here, where it says class name call, right? I'm going to put a new link, right? And the new link is going to be to something that doesn't exist yet, which is going to be /add. So whenever I type in /add, right, then I want the link to take me to where it's going. And in here, we need a couple things. One of them is going to be, and it doesn't understand what a link is because we haven't included it. We have to install it. So again, I'm just going to go here and just say add import from React router DOM, which is going to basically just add in this React router DOM link right here, right? Now, typically, I have to tell you that I'd like to have this at the top. And that doesn't really matter. I just like structuring it this way. So this is where I want this to be, up here, okay? So React router DOM. And what I want is this add link. It's going to be basically say something like, add TV show, right? That's what it's going to be like. It's going to actually show properly. Add TV show. You want to add the TV show to the, to the list is what we're doing here, right? And we need some things to do this. Let's structure this as a button. So although it's a link, let's make it look like a button. And so we're going to say that this is going to be from an ID. If we want to target it, we'll call this the add button. And from a class name, we'll say that the class name is going to be a button dash primary with a margin bottom of 1, right? And what I also want to put in here is some kind of I tag that allows me to put in a circle with a plus. So I want to put in an I tag, right? And the I tag is going to have a class name. Let's just make it so that you guys can all see this. A class name that's equal to, this is our Font Awesome class, right? Which is going to be FA solid, FA circle dash plus, right? Which is going to produce that plus circle. It's going to look like a link that has a circle with a plus on it, okay? And then save, right? And let's see what this looks like in our contact list page. So again, on the contact list page, going back to this, right? Now you can see that if we did it properly, there'd be like a little add TV show with a little plus button, okay? So, how come it didn't show up? Well, let's take a look at Font Awesome. Maybe I put the wrong thing in here. So if I'm Font Awesome, I'm going to go to icons and I'm going to go put in a plus, right? and you want to make it so that it's free. And I want to put this plus circle plus thing. And you can see that FA solid circle, FA circle plus is what I wanted. And going back to that, did I do that? FA circle plus, I don't know, but we're just going to just teleport that in there, right? There we go. Yeah, I made it wrong. That's all. Save. Save. And it looks like this now. There's a little plus icon and the add TV show. Add TV show doesn't do anything. If I click onto it right now, it goes to an add route that doesn't exist. There is no route that's add. Well, we need to make a route that's add. We need to make that route in order for us to show the add new movie or new TV show thing, right? So going back to that then, right? We modified our TV show list to have the add button. Let's add that into GitHub. I'm going slower today. Git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say included an add button in the TV show list. Git push, right? There we go. That's what that is. And I need a link to support that, right? So the link is going to be a brand new link that's inside of my TV shows folder. That's why I did that. Remember, Kyle was asking, like, why'd you separate this? I'm going to make another component here. I'm going to call it add. So again, now I want to talk about this because it's just the add component, right? And components so far have been pretty much lowercase. Some people use an uppercase, camel case kind of convention. I'm fine with that too. But here I'm just going to make a brand new file called add.tsx. And you can call this different things. Again, I'm going to import React. You don't need to do that. And I'm also going to make a function that I want. The function is going to be called add TV show, right? Add TV show. And I'm going to export it. This one. I'll be okay. All right, now some stuff that I need with this one, right? Inside of here. How does it work? Well, I'm going to use state, right? And I want a couple things that I want to keep thinking about, right? I want to have our movie or our TV show model, right? So I'm going to say, let's import the model, import, again, TV show from TV show. So I want to get that model, right? Because we need that. I also need the TV show data service as well. Let's get that. So import TV show list data service, right, from that as well. I want those two things, right? Because I want to start doing stuff. I'm also going to use, I'm also going to include a link, right? And I'm also going to use something else called use navigate. Oh yeah, there's a new one I'm going to be using too, from React Router DOM. Okay, so use navigate link. I'm setting all this up, as well as a couple things from React, which is my change events, as well as my use effect. And let's also include use state. Okay, so those are all the things I'm going to use. I'm just importing all those things at the top. Okay. I want to start thinking about setting up my states. So I'm going to say const, and I'm going to use, the first one is going to be the TV show title, right? And I'm going to set the TV show title. Now you can say also the title and the show title or set title. Maybe we'll just call it like that. So we'll say the title, and then we're going to say set title. Okay, we know what that is. It's the TV show title I'm setting. Okay, and we're going to say that use state, and we're going just to initialize it with nothing at the beginning. And we're also going to set up the studio. So studio, and then set studio, and that's going to be equal to the use states, where we're going to have that as initialized as nothing as well. Like so, just initialized there. I want to use effect, right? And just like we've done before, we're just going to make it so that it changes the title of our document. For now, we're going to use this maybe in other ways, right? And we're also going to give it a dependency graph of nothing. So we're only going to, do this one time, right? That's what this does. I need some kind of, if I'm going to use this as a element, I need a return, okay? And the return is going to start off with a div class, a div tag with a class of container. And what I want inside the div of the class of container is an h1 tag. Here's an h1 tag with a class of column large 6, and then column medium 10. Let's do a couple of columns this time around. Let's do column small 10 as well. And then inside of that, kind of h1 tag, we'll also put in something like add TV show, right? That is the h1. That's the name, if you will, of or the title of our form we're going to make here. I want to make a horizontal rule go in there, and maybe we'll have a div area later on. Maybe we'll have a message area in here too. For now, though, we're going to just have. Let's skip down here. I'm going to have a div with a class of row. I'm also going to have a class of justify content large center, right? And a gutter of 3. Okay. And inside of that, we're going to have a form with a class of column dash large dash 6 and column dash medium dash 10 and column dash small dash 10, since we added it above there. That's what the form is going to be. The form action right now is none. So let's get rid of the form action. We don't care about that, right? And we're going to have an on submit eventually. And on submit is going to be something like save TV show. So let's add that function, be preemptive and add it in. So we'll have a new function that we'll call something like on, which we'll call save TV show. And that save TV show function is going to be called here whenever I submit my form. So my form itself is going to have an on submit. We've done this before, which we're going to call save TV show. That's what that's going to do. We don't have anything in there right now. It's empty, but that's really what my form is going to do. Okay. So pretty straightforward. Okay. And just to complete the form, before we complete the form, let's take a short break. I want to also take a look and see, can we even see this form right now? Can we see at least the title that says, or this thing that says add TV show? Can I even get here? And how do I do that? So again, what I'd probably do is in my app.tsx, I'd have another path for this where I say something like, let's just copy paste here. And I'm just going to copy paste the path that's going to be, instead of TV show lists, right? Again, there's ways of making this more layered, if you will, right? But for now, all I want to do is put add. So here is just going to be add. If I go to the add link, that's the add link. It's going to go to my add, file or the add method, which is, if you remember, add TV show, which is what I called it, add TV show. The add TV show route is here, but it shouldn't be here. I'm going to put it next to the other ones that are from my TV show list components, which is up here. Okay, that's just me. I like organizing myself. And if I press save here, right, the way it is, then I've done all the piece parts I need. So let's review before I take a break. In my TV show list data service, I added a create. I know that in my TV show list, I'm going to have a little button that allows me to add new TV shows. And I need to have a new route for doing this, the add route. I need to make that route. And I made it here in my add.tsx. I haven't completed it yet, but there's going to be a form here. And I got to register this route in my app.tsx, which is right here in the router. Now that I've got this part done, we should be able to go back up here and it should say add TV show. And if I refresh, you can see that that is the case, right? So again, if I go to TV shows list, and if I click on this add TV show, it's going to take me to this link, which is the add link. Okay. Again, are you with me? Were you able to do this? This part up to here. It's good. Thank you. Address is okay. And I apologize, I'm going a little slower than normal for some of you, but I have to go back. Not typing fast enough. Okay. Let me go back to this. So I'm going to go back to my add TSX. This is where I'm going to stop. And let's take a short break. And when I take a short break, let's go 5 minutes. We'll come back at 10, take a little water break and bathroom break. And when we come back, we'll do the next part. And we'll see if we can add the create route that's working so that we can create a new TV show and populate it up on Firebase. Let's try this out and see what happens. Let's take a short break. I'm going to stop.